Have you ever felt completely invisible, even amid dozens of people passing by, as if your pain wasn't enough to make anyone stop, look, or reach out? Imagine that for a moment. You're on the ground, injured, confused, on a deserted road where cars slice through the wind without even slowing down. Every passing headlight is a hope lit and extinguished. That's exactly how it all began. A young woman lying on the side of the road, her body bruised, her knee bleeding, and her heart in panic, saw the indifference of an entire world parade before her eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't have the strength. She just tried with her eyes to beg for help. A subtle gesture, a trembling hand raised as if to say, "See me." But no one saw. With each passing car, the silence grew inside. It was as if the universe were testing the limits of solitude. What if you had been there? Would you have stopped? Sometimes the most powerful stories are those that emerge in moments when all seems lost, when no one sees, no one hears, no one cares. But that's precisely when life-changing encounters arise. The unlikely encounters. The encounters no one planned but were destined to happen. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover now may truly surprise you. That road, straight and monotonous, seemed a symbol of everyday life. People coming and going, each wrapped up in their own problems, with their windows rolled up and their hearts too. How many of us have passed someone in silence, ignoring a cry for help that wasn't spoken aloud? That girl, that day, was a reflection of that. A mixture of physical pain, shock, and abandonment, but also of resilience. She didn't faint. She didn't give up. And perhaps it was precisely this silent force that made fate act. Because at a certain point, when she had already lost track of time, a car stopped. It wasn't modern, it wasn't luxurious, and it wasn't speeding. It was as if the vehicle felt the pain of the road and the man who got out. He didn't seem to be there by chance. But before I tell you who he was, I want to make you think. What makes us stop? What triggers in someone the instinct to help, to go out of their way, to care for a stranger? Is there something that separates those who deviate from those who reach out? Because this story isn't just about an accident. It's about what's behind the eyes of the beholder. It's about empathy, about faith, and about how sometimes it's in the darkest moments that light appears, even if dressed in simplicity. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt small in the face of people's coldness? Or on the contrary, have you ever been touched by an unexpected gesture coming from someone who didn't even know your name? This story goes beyond a rescue. It speaks of the courage to stop, to get out of the car, to get your hands dirty for someone the world pretended not to see. And perhaps hearing this, you'll start to remember something similar. A memory, a detail, a scene that was saved because it left a mark. That's why stories like this can't be ignored, because they have the power to reactivate in us what time sometimes puts to sleep, the ability to connect with others. And it's precisely when no one expects a different ending that it happens. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, and perhaps, listening to this now, you remembered someone, or a moment that left a mark on you. It might have been a look, a small gesture, or even the absence of someone. These memories come suddenly, like someone slowly touching a place that still hurts, but also teaches. And that's when the story stops being just mine, or just hers. It becomes ours. Because every person who hears this kind of story carries within them something that connects, something they understand. And when we share that, something changes. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what's touched you most so far. Sometimes a single sentence of yours can resonate with someone reading. It can open up space for someone who's never had the courage to talk about their experience. And yes, it's your participation here that makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. Because when you comment, like, and subscribe, YouTube understands that these stories matter. And then together they go further. They reach those who need to hear them. So if you somehow felt part of this, if this story resonated with you, click the like button. It helps more than you can imagine. And subscribe to the channel to continue watching content like this, which isn't just videos, it's encounters. It's living memories being told truthfully. Now back to that road. That young woman lying there on the shoulder of the road, injured and invisible to the eyes of so many, had a name. But more than that, she had a story. One of those stories that doesn't make the news, that doesn't make headlines, but that carries everything we most understand as human: pain, struggle, and an almost desperate desire to start over. Her name was Elisa, 22 years old, a daughter of the countryside. her heart too big to fit into the silences life imposed. That morning she had made a difficult decision, to leave behind a town too small for her dreams, and a relationship that, even without visible scars, had already left her with deep wounds. She didn't run away, she sought, and that changes everything. She sought peace, freedom, perhaps a chance to remember who she was, before she began to silence herself to please others. With a simple backpack and a dead cell phone, she accepted a ride from acquaintances to a stop on the highway. From there, the plan was to catch a bus to the next town, where a friend had offered temporary shelter. Nothing very planned, everything decided on the impulse of someone who knows that if they stop to think too much, they'll end up backtracking. But the unexpected happened. Theo stumbled on the edge of the road, a loss of balance while trying to cross, and what was supposed to be just a step forward turned into a fall. She didn't remember the crash very well, only the pain and the feeling that everything had slowed down. Her scraped knee, her throbbing arm, her eyes struggling to focus, her body crying out for help, and the cars passing by, one after the other, headlights illuminating her presence but never stopping, faces seeing her and turning away, as if they didn't want to get involved, as if her problem were too much for someone who already had their own burden. That hurt more than the cut on her arm. It was as if the world was saying, "It's not our business." And it's strange, isn't it? Because we grow up hearing that all we need to do is ask for help, that there will always be someone. But in practice, it seems that other people's haste overpowers compassion. Elisa thought about this as she tried to get up on her own, staggering, holding back tears and shame. Because yes, we feel shame even when it's not our fault. Our mind starts repeating those harsh phrases. See, no one cares. It's better to go back. You can't even go out alone. But it was at that moment, just as she was beginning to accept that she would end the night right there, that something unusual happened. A slow engine hum, a headlight that didn't pass by, a car that pulled up. And from inside, a simple man emerged, wearing worn pants and a watchful gaze. He didn't look like a hero, nor did he arrive making promises. He simply approached calmly and said, "Are you okay, sweetheart?" His voice broke the silence like someone opening a window in a dark room. He was a local pastor. He was returning from a hospital visit when he saw the scene from a distance. He himself said later that he almost moved on, but something pulled him along. A feeling he couldn't explain. He just kept going. And sometimes that's what life is made of, small decisions that seem simple but change entire destinies. He didn't ask why she was there. He didn't care if it was her fault. He just offered help, water, a blanket from the back seat, and then a phone call to let her friend in the next town know she was on her way. And while they waited for the ride, he sat beside her, as if in no rush, and listened. Because more than the fall, what Elisa needed at that moment was someone who would truly see her, who wouldn't treat her like a nuisance or a statistic, someone who would tell her, with a gesture, that she still mattered. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened there wasn't just an encounter between a man and a wounded young woman. It was a turning point. One of those moments when reality shows, behind the scenes of the hustle and bustle of the world, that empathy still exists, that there are still people who choose to stop, and that one action, even a small one, can completely change someone's path. Stories like Elisa's make us look differently at what seems banal. They make us rethink our own decisions, our way of seeing others, and perhaps more importantly, they show us how an unexpected attitude can have a much deeper impact than we imagine. Comment below, "This resonates with me." I want to know if this story touched you in any way, because when we share what we feel, the world becomes less silent, and sometimes that alone is the beginning of something new. She hadn't expected it to be this far. The road was nearly empty, the sky was beginning to darken, and the wind cut through the fields like a whispered warning. Elisa walked along the side of the asphalt with her backpack clutched to her chest, trying to ignore the discomfort of the day's accumulated heat and the persistent twinge in her ankle, which had been bothering her since early afternoon. But it was just one more step, just one more kilometer, just until she found a bus stop, a sign, anything that said, "Keep going, you're on the right path." It was then that she heard it. The sound came fast, loud and deep, tires screeching on the asphalt, an aggressive hum, as if time had decided to speed up just for her. And before she could fully look, the headlights burst across the side of her face like a white explosion. She turned instinctively, and that was the exact moment the world lost its balance. The impact wasn't direct, but it was enough. A side mirror probably hit her shoulder hard, throwing her several meters forward. The fall happened in slow motion. Her body tumbled, her arms trying to hold on to the impossible. A piece of rock ripped through the fabric of her pants. Her knees hit the ground with a loud crack, and the left side of her face brushed the hot ground. And then, silence. Absolute silence. For a second, it seemed like nothing else existed. The sound of the car had already faded. No braking, no turning back, just her, lying there, her chest heaving, her mind desperately trying to make sense of what had just happened. The pain came later. First, a dull burning. Then a sharp twinge in her shoulder, as if the muscle were screaming. The metallic taste in her mouth, the ringing in her ears, her blurred gaze trying to focus on some stable shape on the horizon. And her heart, beating too fast, as if trying to compensate for the feeling of vulnerability that was taking over her from the inside out. Elisa tried to sit up. Her hands were shaking, covered in dirt and gravel. Her eyes stung with dust and tears, but she couldn't tell if she was crying from pain, fear, or anger. Maybe all at once. She looked around hopefully, thinking someone had seen her, that car, that driver, would have stopped, would have looked in the rearview mirror and turned back. But the road now seemed emptier than ever, and it's amazing how time stretches in these moments. Minutes that feel like hours, thoughts that run wild, invade, overwhelm. She wondered if something was broken, if she could walk, if her cell phone was still intact. She thought about her mother's face. She thought that perhaps she had made a huge mistake by going out like that, alone, believing life was more generous than it really was. But at the same time, something inside her refused to give in to despair. It was as if a flame persisted, however faint, that same flame that had drawn her from where she was, that had driven her to seek a new story. And there on the ground, with her body aching and her heart racing, that flame was what kept her conscious, present, human. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because that moment, the fall, wasn't just a physical accident. It was a symbolic rupture with everything that had come before. There on that roadside, she stopped being just a young woman running from something. She became someone who faced it, who resisted, who survived, even when no one seemed willing to see her. The physical pain was real, but the true impact was emotional. That shock of realizing firsthand how much the world can go on without looking back, how much we, sometimes, need to be our own shelter until something or someone reaches us. Write down, I'm on this journey too. If you've ever experienced a time when you needed to get back on your feet, even without support. She dragged herself to the edge of the road, trying to get off the road out of instinct for survival. Her hands were dirty, blood running in discreet rivulets down her knee, her shoulder throbbing as if screaming with every movement. But the worst part wasn't the pain, it wasn't the fear, it was the silence. An almost deafening silence, as if the entire world had turned its face away, as if, for some inexplicable reason, her existence had ceased to matter to passers-by. The first car came. It passed slowly. The headlights illuminated his body, showing his pained expression, his hand raised almost limply. But he kept going, as if she were part of the scenery, some obstacle in the way. And then another came, and another. Cars with families, with young people laughing, with people who looked and swerved, people who didn't stop, who saw, and kept going. It's strange to think that, at certain moments in life, we feel like we only need a gesture, a firm look, an open door, a sincere question. Are you okay? But there on that road, Elisa was treated like an invisible burden, like an uncomfortable pause in the hurried pace of someone who just wants to get there. And this creates an impact that goes beyond the physical. It hurts the soul. That feeling of social abandonment, that your pain doesn't matter, that your life could be hanging by a thread and still not be enough for someone to slam on the brakes. With each passing car, her hope faded a little. She no longer had the strength to scream, her throat dry, her eyes filling not only with tears, but with shame. Why didn't anyone stop? What made that road so indifferent? At what point did people start to believe that helping someone was too dangerous, too costly, too off the beaten track? This is a hidden truth that few people like to face. Indifference hurts more than the fall. Because the physical pain passes, the body regenerates, but the memory that you needed someone and no one came, that remains. It sticks deep within. It changes the way you see the world, how you trust people, how you believe in kindness. And it is precisely at this point that many inner journeys begin. Because when the external fails, when the world turns its back, the only way out is to look within, to ask yourself why, and not in the sense of blaming yourself, but to seek a deeper answer, an explanation for the abandonment, a way to not let yourself be hardened by it. Because it's easy to turn to stone after being ignored. It's easy to close your heart when it bleeds into emptiness. But Elisa wasn't made entirely of fragility. There was something about her that endured, a quiet strength like that of someone who's been through more than meets the eye. And it was this strength that kept her eyes open, even when the headlights seemed to mock her loneliness. She remained there, waiting, not for pity but for humanity. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what comes next isn't just a change of fortune or a stroke of fate. It's the turning point, where the unexpected enters the scene and reveals more about the human soul than any pretty speech. It's the moment someone decides to do something different. Stop, get off, look someone in the eye. And this, as simple as it may seem, can be the difference between someone continuing or giving up. Comment below, this makes sense to me, if you've ever experienced or witnessed a moment when the world seemed indifferent to someone's pain. It was there, between the pain and the abandonment, that something changed. A different sound cut through the silence of that road, not the hurried sound of tires screeching away, nor the indifferent headlights passing by. It was a different sound, slower. An old car, its engine purring as if it carried time within it. And it stopped, right there beside her, as if it knew, as if it had been called by a force inexplicable with logic. The door creaked slowly, and the man who got out looked like he'd stepped out of another time. A simple shirt, worn pants, a steady gaze. He wasn't young, but he didn't look old either. And the curious thing was that, on the passenger seat, almost hidden among papers and a bottle of water, was a Bible. That alone would have been symbolic enough, but it was more than that. It was the way he saw it. He didn't look at her with pity. He didn't look startled. He didn't hesitate. He walked toward her with the calm of someone who understands the weight of another's pain, as if he'd seen it before or worse. And in that moment something different happened. For the first time since the impact, Elisa felt like she existed, that someone was there, in a suit, present, not as a spectator, but as a human being willing to care. "You're alive," he said, and that was it. But those words, so simple, carried an entire universe, because even then, she herself had already begun to doubt. And it's curious how, sometimes, life chooses strangers to remind us of our importance. It wasn't a relative, it wasn't a friend, it was just any man, guided perhaps by faith, perhaps by an instinct that surpasses logic, and that goes by the name of compassion. The most impressive thing is that he didn't ask what had happened right away. He didn't even want to know if she'd made a mistake, if she was running away, if it was her fault. He just acted. He grabbed a blanket from the trunk, offered her water, and asked her name with a tone of familiarity. And in that simple gesture, the entire scenario changed. The road that had previously been synonymous with indifference now harbored a rare encounter, someone who decided to stop. These seemingly small decisions have a huge impact, and this is where a hidden truth many people overlook comes into play. Sometimes, the most transformative moments in our journey come from the hands of people we never imagined we'd meet. It's these unexpected twists and turns that redefine the path. They pull us out of emotional depth and remind us that humanity still exists behind the scenes. The pastor, as she would later discover, had no clear destination on that road. He was returning from a retreat, something simple, unhurried, but he decided to take a different path that day without quite knowing why. It was as if something greater had pushed him to that specific point, at that exact time, and that's where the story begins to take on a different weight. Because it wasn't just help, it was a rediscovery of faith, not necessarily religious faith, but faith in others, in goodness, in the chance to be saved even when all seems lost. What she felt in that moment wasn't just relief, it was recognition, an almost spiritual sense that despite the pain, there was still room to begin again. And it all began with that unknown man, standing beside her, kneeling, offering presence and silence in the place of judgment. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what came after this unexpected encounter reveals even more about how our decisions shape not only our path, but also the paths of those we cross paths with, even if only for a few minutes. And you'll understand why this gesture changed everything in ways she never could have imagined. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too," if you believe that small gestures can still transform lives. And what he did next was even more impactful, not because of the words he used, but because of the silence he offered. He sat down on the asphalt, unhurriedly, as if that stretch of road had become, right there, a shelter. He stood beside her, not above her, not as someone who knew better or as a hero of the moment, just as someone willing to be there. And that, in that moment, was everything. Without asking much, he simply extended his hand. Elisa hesitated. It was covered in blood, her fingers trembling, but he didn't pull away. He simply held it and didn't let go. It was a simple yet profound gesture, as if to say, "You don't have to go through this alone." And in that touch, she felt something she hadn't felt in days. Safety, presence, humanity. He owed her nothing. He didn't know her. He didn't know where she came from, what had happened, or why she was there. But he stayed. And the most curious thing is that, as he held her hand, he began to pray quietly. Not a performative prayer, the kind that seems more like a speech than faith. It was intimate, almost whispered, and it didn't ask for explanations. It was thankful, for being there, for having arrived on time. And it stirred something inside her she hadn't even known still existed, because sometimes transformation doesn't come with grand gestures. It begins in details not everyone notices, a look, a gentle word, the silence that respects another's pain. And it was in that silence, in that pause amidst the chaos, that Elisa began to breathe differently. It still hurt. There was still fear, but there was also a thread of hope forming there amidst the dust of the road. He called for help without making a fuss. He calmly explained the situation, gave the exact location, and then sat back down. While they waited, he told her he'd lost a daughter years ago in a similar accident, and that ever since he'd stopped whenever he saw something strange on the road. "I couldn't save mine, but maybe I was called to be here for you." That phrase echoed in her mind for a long time. It's amazing how decisions we make in seconds can have an impact that lasts for years, sometimes a lifetime. And this was one of those decisions. He didn't turn away. He didn't speed up. He stayed. And by staying, he saved more than just a young woman's wounded body. He saved her ability to trust again, to believe that, yes, there are still people who choose to do good, even without guarantees, even without recognition. She never forgot that moment. The hot asphalt, the sound of help arriving, and that simple man, in a light shirt and calm gaze, telling her she mattered, that her life had value, and that, even though she'd seemed invisible until then, she had been seen, truly. This story shows that acceptance doesn't depend on old ties or social obligations. It arises from a conscious decision, a choice to be present, even when it's not necessary, even when the world tells us to move on and ignore it. Because, in the end, this is what differentiates those who pass through life merely observing from those who truly participate in it, being a part of it, touching it, transforming it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened after that, far from the eyes of those who passed by that road, brings surprising revelations about how unexpected encounters can alter not only the course of a life, but also the meaning we give to our own existence. Comment: this makes sense to me. If this type of gesture has ever touched your heart, it was there, with her leg still throbbing with pain, and her eyes still watering with fear, that she realized something she hadn't felt in a long time: calm. And it wasn't because everything was resolved, because it wasn't yet, but because someone had stopped for her. Someone had looked, listened, touched. And that gesture, however small it seemed, initiated a silent transformation within her, almost imperceptible at first glance, but real, profound, irreversible. Until the ambulance arrived, she kept her eyes fixed on that man. And with each passing minute, his presence seemed to dissolve a little of the layer of distrust that had built up around her over the years. That barrier the world builds within us, little by little, every time we go through a situation where we reach out and no one holds it. But he did, and that alone has reversed so much. When the paramedics arrived, she was whisked away, but not before hearing him say one more time, "You're not invisible. You never were." They were just a few words, but they were etched like an emotional tattoo, because amidst so many people passing by, dodging, ignoring, he was the only one who saw more than a fallen body. He saw a story, a soul, a chance to make a difference. And he did. During the following days in the hospital, as she struggled with her physical recovery, something more subtle also reorganized within her, a renewed trust in others. Not complete, not innocent, but restored enough for her to believe again that not all is lost, that there are still people who choose to act with kindness without expecting anything in return. And this, for her, was like finding hope again after having believed it had disappeared forever. And the most beautiful thing of all is that that reconnection with goodness didn't remain in the memory of that day. It lingered. It echoed in her subsequent decisions, in her future actions, in the way she began to treat those who crossed her path. Because that's what happens when we're truly touched. The impact doesn't stay on the surface. It molds, infects, transforms. And this transformation changes the way we walk through the world. She didn't become a different person overnight, but she began making small choices with a different mindset. She began noticing when someone needed help, even if it was a worried look on the subway or someone struggling to cross the street. And every time she hesitated, she remembered that man, that afternoon, that road, and she decided to stop too. That's how she understood that not every miracle comes with lights in the sky or voices from beyond. Sometimes a miracle is just someone stopping you in the middle of the road, sitting next to you and saying, "You matter." This kind of miracle doesn't just change a day. It changes trajectories, it changes beliefs, it changes where we choose to place our faith. And that's exactly what she regained that day. Faith. Not just in something greater, but in people, in others, in the idea that good, however silent, still finds space in the world. And perhaps the most powerful thing about all this is understanding that this new faith wasn't born from a theoretical explanation, but from a real experience in the middle of a road on any given afternoon. No scripts, no promises, no obligations, just presence and choice. A choice that came from someone who owed nothing, but who decided nonetheless to offer everything they had: attention, care, and humanity. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a detail in this story that few people notice, but that can completely change the way we understand the impact of being in the right place, at the right time, with a willing heart. Comment below, "I'm on this journey too," if you've ever felt that an unexpected gesture changed the way you see the world. She was already being placed on the stretcher when he approached once more. With the same serene look as when he arrived, he bent down slightly, took her hand, now wrapped in makeshift gauze, and said in a low, firm voice, as if not just to her, but also to something hovering around her, "You still have a purpose. That's why you're alive." And then he released her hand, stood slowly, and walked back to the car, as if he had already done what needed to be done, without asking anything, without leaving a name, just leaving the sentence. And the impact of those words was stronger than any sedative she'd taken that night, because for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe there was still something waiting for her up ahead, not necessarily a grand mission, but a reason, a meaning, a why. During the drive to the hospital, she repeated those words in her mind like a secret mantra: "You still have a purpose." And each time they echoed within her, a piece of the confusion that had gripped her heart began to reorganize. Because until that moment, all she'd carried was pain, shame, and the feeling of failure. But now there was another layer, a possibility, the revelation that life hadn't ended there, on the asphalt, that this wasn't the end. It was a turning point. It's curious how some phrases, however simple they may seem, carry such great power, not because of what they say, but because of when they're said, and by whom. Because if a stranger, someone who didn't know her, who didn't know her name or her story, was able to see value in her at a moment of such fragility, who else could see it too? How many other people did she herself let pass by every day, judging by their silence, their downcast gaze, their invisible baggage? These questions gradually emerged during my hospitalization, and with them, a new mindset began to form. The idea that the most important decisions on our journey are often not the ones we make rationally, but those that happen deep within our souls, when we are touched by something that goes beyond logic, something that, deep down, reconnects us with the hidden truth of who we truly are and who we can still be. She began writing about it, not with the intention of publishing it, but to organize the inner workings that the encounter had so beautifully disrupted. Each written word was a step back inward, a reunion with parts of herself that had been dormant, forgotten, discredited. And it was in this process that she realized the true meaning of what the pastor had said. Because having a purpose wasn't about doing something great or becoming someone admired. It was about continuing, about not giving up, about being present, about looking within and, despite the scars, still choosing to be kind, still choosing to love, still choosing to walk. The effect of that moment went far beyond relief. It was as if he had planted a seed of hope where before there had been only hard concrete, and that seed, even without realizing it, was already growing. And it wasn't just about her anymore, because what grows inside us eventually spills out. And she knew deep down that sooner or later she would come across someone who had also fallen by the wayside, needing to hear exactly what she had heard. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a detail about what happened after this encounter that is rarely talked about, but which reveals a surprising side of this story. Comment below. This makes sense to me. If this part of the story touched you in any way. Her recovery wasn't just physical. Her body gradually responded to the care, medication, and rest. But what was most surprising was what happened inside, that slow, silent, and powerful process of internal reconstruction. Because when she finally found the strength to get out of her hospital bed and face her own reflection, she was no longer the same person. There was a new clarity in her eyes, a different perception of life and herself. Something had changed, and it wasn't just because of the accident. It was because of what came after, the way she was seen, welcomed, rescued. She understood over time that gesture, which for many would have been just an ordinary act of kindness, had been for her the starting point of a new mindset. And with this new way of seeing came new decisions. She became interested in stories similar to her own. She began seeking out accounts of people who, like her, had been touched by strangers in moments of extreme vulnerability. It was as if she wanted to prove to herself that this wasn't an isolated incident, that there was, indeed, an invisible network of unlikely encounters happening every day, encounters that changed paths, saved lives, and rekindled purpose. This search led her to sign up as a volunteer for a project that offered support to victims of accidents and emotional trauma. She felt called from within, as if she were giving back what she had received, not exactly to the pastor who helped her, but to life, to others, to herself. And it was in this environment, surrounded by stories marked by pain, new beginnings, and overcoming, that she found a new place in the world. Without realizing it, she became a reference for those in the process of rebuilding. Because when she spoke, it wasn't with pre-written phrases or rehearsed speeches. It was with truth, with empathy, with a sparkle in her eyes that said, "I know what it's like, but I also know that we can keep going." Over time, that young woman who once felt invisible decided to share her own story publicly. It was a short, unpretentious video, recorded on her cell phone while sitting on a park bench. She just wanted to record it, get it out there, perhaps close a cycle. But what happened next was something even she didn't expect. The story went viral. People from all over the country commented, identified themselves, thanked her for that message. People who had never felt seen before and suddenly found a voice similar to their own. And the most curious thing, many said that what touched them most was not the accident itself, nor the pastor's gesture, but what came afterward, the unfolding, the transformation. Because there's something deeply human in seeing someone go through such a difficult time and still be able to extract beauty, meaning, and revelations. It was impactful. It inspired. It brought to light the hidden truth that we will all fall at some point, and that perhaps what saves us isn't always a grand miracle, but the silent presence of someone who decides to stop. And that's how she understood definitively that that man hadn't just saved her life. He'd opened a portal. He'd created a breach through which everything she needed at that moment passed. Faith, trust, humanity. And through that breach, she forged a new journey. Not perfect, not painless, but conscious, chosen, and above all purposeful. She never saw the pastor again. She never knew his name or where he came from. But every now and then, she still closes her eyes and remembers the feeling she had when she heard that phrase, "You still have a purpose." And she realizes that it's not necessary to know the face of the person who plants the seed. What matters is what you do with it after it sprouts. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happens when this story comes back to the person who lived it is even more powerful than you can imagine. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. If this type of silent transformation has also affected you in some way, now just imagine. What if that pastor hadn't stopped? If he had done the same as everyone else, slowed down, glanced quickly in the rearview mirror, and continued on as if nothing had happened? Perhaps today this story would never have been told. Perhaps that young woman would have been just another number, another case drowned out by the blaring of horns. by the hurried pace of a world that doesn't usually look to the side. But he stopped, and that made all the difference. This question resonates powerfully because it reveals a hidden truth that many of us avoid facing. Every day we cross paths with people who carry pain we don't see. People who are there, on the verge of collapse, waiting for just one gesture, not of perfection but of humanity, a watchful eye, a willing ear, an action that doesn't have to be grandiose, but carries within it the capacity to make an impact, to change destinies. We tend to believe that great transformations come from great acts, but often it's the details, the small things, the things no one notices, a word spoken at the right time, a step towards someone, even when the instinct would be to walk away. That's the beauty of unlikely encounters. They don't require logic. They happen where you least expect it, with people you might never see again, and yet they leave a lasting impression. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what this story reveals, almost symbolically, is the power of silent decisions, the ones no one applauds, the ones that don't make headlines, but that change someone's course, and maybe that person doesn't even realize it at the time, but they'll remember days or even years later that a new journey began. Have you ever stopped to think about how many lives have passed you by without you even noticing? How many times have you been on the other side, needing someone to stop, and they didn't? It's at this point that empathy stops being a nice idea and becomes practical action, a choice. And that's where true transformation lies, when we understand that we don't need to be a pastor, a hero, or have ready-made answers. We just need to be willing. That young woman's journey could have ended there on the hot asphalt, surrounded by indifference, but it didn't, because someone decided to stop. Someone who owed her nothing, yet offered everything they could: presence, prayer, help, and a phrase that reopened the doors of hope. You still have a purpose. Those words weren't just spoken, they were felt, and they echoed within her like a summons, as if life in that instant had decided to remind her that there was still something to be lived, built, shared. Stories like these remind us that there's a fine line between passing and remaining, and that this line is often defined by a simple choice: to stop or not to stop. The difference between someone continuing to believe in good or losing faith altogether can be in a gesture we don't even know we made. And that's why telling stories like this matters so much, because they rekindle within us a dormant awareness that we are part of each other's journey, even when we don't realize it. That each person who crosses our path carries an entire universe of pain, dreams, fears, and hopes, and that we can be exactly what they needed in that moment. If this story touched you in any way, comment here. I would have stopped too. This helps this type of content reach more people and shows that empathy still exists in the world. Like the video if you believe in the power of life-changing encounters. Now take a deep breath with me, because there's more to this journey that you need to hear. If you've made it this far, it's because this story also spoke to something deep inside you. Maybe it reminded you of someone, maybe it triggered a memory, or maybe it just made you take a deep breath for a few seconds. It's this kind of connection that keeps me bringing you content like this. Content that touches, provokes, and somehow rekindles what truly matters within us. So, if you feel this message was meant for you, comment below. I'm with you until the end. This shows me that it's worth continuing to share stories like this. Like this video if at any point you felt your heart beat differently, and subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories that truly touch us. There's a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. The conversation isn't over yet.